My repeat of Bring da Ruckus, Breg Boswell's route on Lochnagar, caused discussions about condition and style. Some people thought it was discordant with the ethics of Scottish winter climbing. It's when the normal opinion exchange turned into debating the validity of our repeat, it felt unfair to me and also not really well informed. So, that's why I decided I should share some relevant otherwise omitted facts. First of all, I want to point out that in choosing my challenge, it wasn't my intention to compare myself to Greg's lead style. I have huge respect for his winter CV, and his ascent and opinion on the difficulty of the route were an inspiration to me. He said that the sustained nature of this route and the power-packed and blind crux roof puts it above every other high-grade route he has climbed in Scotland. It's definitely the most powerful and home to the most physically hard moves stacked on the top of each other that I've done in Scotland. He graded it 12-13, the first ever winter route to be given that grade, a new winter climbing territory as reported by ukclimbing.com. I was motivated to repeat Bring da Ruckus in a style consistent local ethics, but at the same time reflecting my approach to climbing, with meticulous care for the cleanliness of the final push. And so, that's what I did. Sadly, I found some response to my ascent to be very biased. Some people criticized the condition and style of our ascent, while carefully forgetting or omitting similar important examples that have taken place through the history of Scottish winter climbing. It is only right to objectively present the facts and illustrate the historical background and to allow observers to make up their minds. When listening to the critics talk about conditions, one might get an impression that all the previous ascents in the history of Scottish winter climbing took place on walls that were snow white from hoar, rim ice and frost all at once, and that I'm the only profaner who allowed himself to climb on black rock. At the same time, the critics are very quick to forget earlier significant ascents that took place in similar not Scottish winter conditions just because they were steep and hard. Let's recall, for example, the case of Anubis, the first winter 12, and its first winter ascent by the hands and the ice access to the Scotsman Dave Macleod. After his performance, none other than Simon Richardson himself, who co-created the off-seated rules of Scottish winter climbing condition, wrote in Climb magazine in May 2010. Unfortunately, the first ascent photos of Anubis on Macleod's blog showed that the route was white except the crux section that appeared black. Seasoned winter climbers know that staring at pictures on a computer screen is a poor way of judging conditions and will have experienced the personal disappointment of taking photographs that fail to capture the winteriness of the day. Macleod's account of betting icy cracks, verglass and fighting to protect cracks choked with ice is a more telling assessment of the condition, and his description of the climbing rings true for many high-end Scottish winter climbs. Some critics argued, however, that Anubis failed to meet the Mountaineering Council of Scotland guidelines that a Scottish winter ascent should have a winter appearance with snow, hoar frost, rime ice or verglass covering the rock. As one of the architects of these guidelines, written some 15 years ago, I can state that they were not written for climbs like Anubis, which overhangs 12 meters over its 35 meters long crux section. They were to provide guidelines for vertical or vertical climbs and discourage quasi-winter ascent of the routes with snow on ledge with otherwise dry rock. If we disallow Anubis on appearance grounds, we'll have to wipe the slate clean or many others big Scottish first winter ascents, including great nines such as Sassenach and Sapperat, that bought future climbing through roofs they didn't have their underside white with hoar frost. Please take a look at compilation of pictures of Macleod during his first winter ascent of Anubis and mine during first repeat of Bring da Ruckus. On both occasions, the conditions were very similar, black and icy rock on the crux pitch and unique pitches above. Would you agree? In fact, all the criticism that the route wasn't in Scottish winter conditions is based on the aesthetic impressions of the photos of the crux pitch. Let me remind you that Dawid and I didn't abseil after one of two pitches, but climbed all 5 pitches to the top of Shadow Butters, and then reached Lochnagar summit. Most fail to see that the pitches above were 100% unique, with the added difficulties of super strong wind and snowstorm. Does it mean that Dawid and me had the right to repeat upper pitches, but not the first one just because it's difficult and overhanging? That would be nonsense. So it is issue of conditions about aesthetics or rather the difficulty of the climbing? Right. During Greg's ascent, the headwall was much whiter. It was snowing and windless, and the snowflakes could settle on the small ledges on the headwall. By contrast, during my ascent, it was snowing too, but it was very windy. Snowstorm begins. Does this mean that if the conditions were as easier, I mean without the wind whipping the rope, but aesthetically more in line with tradition, that my ascent would be of greater value and damn it in condition? That would be another nonsense. I know where the holes and friends placement were anyway, and I can assure you that a bit of extra snow or frost rime on the rock wouldn't have hindered my lead. By the way, I will add that in some of important points of the pitch, I couldn't use my friends anyway because of the ice in the cracks. For example, in the crux section under the roof, I spent 7 long minutes on one ice axe, struggling to clean the ice from the crack with the second axe, but my efforts were in vain, and I pushed on without placing the gear. To close the subject of conditions, I want to emphasize the point and show you a photo from the UKCE archive with mega unique condition taken by Graeme in February 1977. If I could teleport myself back somehow to that day, it would have turned out that even when Lochnagar was snowed up to the neck, the Shadow Butters black headwall would still not meet the perfect Scottish winter criteria people demand from me on the lead. Okay, now let's talk about the second issue I was criticized for, about inspecting the route. Right, it's unusual in Scottish ethics, but it has happened before on different occasions. Tim Miller and Jimmy Skelton, Greg's partner from Bring da Ruckus, did so on Stone Bastion. Greg himself did it on Banana Wall. Dave Macleod, for example, on the Horting. After this ascent, he explained the question. I did make a compromise on style, not ground up, but I think my upsell inspection is still at least as respectable ethically as some other top Scottish winter routes, which have seen pre-ascent in summer, very numerous attempts or pre-placed gear. Another example is his own Anubis. Indeed, before leading the route in winter 2010, he climbed it in summer 2005 after cleaning the line on upsail. So, with this important historical example for Scottish winter climbing on one of the most important routes, it seems clear to me that it is unfair to undermine the validity of our ascent and at the same time validate the ones mentioned before, isn't it? But there is one more important question that has been omitted from the debate. I would like you to think about the purity of the style of the final push and the gear placed on lead. What do you think about it? For me, it is of absolute primary importance, and I climbed the route placing all the gear on the lead. So, my ascent was in pure red point style, whereas Greg, because of his ground-up ethics, did it with friends pre-placed in the roof, gear that held his 2 previous falls placed on his previous attempts. Obviously, it doesn't change anything about my big respect for his bold first ascent, But still, having gear left on the route from previous attempts matters, especially when in the crux. Macleod touched on it, saying, more gear on a steep, hard route will make it easier. Asked about the issue after his winter ascent of Anubis, he admitted that after falling off a mountain crag, it's not feasible to upsell down to collect your gear for each subsequent attempt, and leaving progressively more gear in a route reduce the overall difficulty of the climb when it's finally executed. However, he added that in the case of Anubis, he has just 2 pieces in the route and they didn't make much difference. But the things didn't always go that way. For example, Banana Wall, the second 12 in the history of Scottish winter climbing. All the 3 ascents, Breg Boswell's first ascent and repeats by Calum Muskett and Dave Macleod, were done with the gig left in from previous attempts. Muskett admitted that in these conditions, both his lead and Macleod's were more like an M10 for the actual ascent. All in all, I am still puzzled and perplexed and frankly a bit sad that instead of being able to joyfully celebrate our first adventure in Scotland, I have to present obvious well-known historical evidence and facts to achieve fairness and balance. My base principle is to be transparent, and I have described clearly how the ascent was done. It's a pity that not everyone can appreciate this honesty, the effort that was put in, and the ascent itself. It is hard not to feel that our repeat of Scotland's hardest winter route as the first and only route done up there has really annoyed a few people, but it doesn't change that our satisfaction from the achievement of the goal is there to stay.